Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Tuesday, November 8th, 2022. Today is an important day for some reason. It's because Andrew Ivins is here to talk Florida recruiting with you Bucknutters. This is what you call back by popular demand. I think this is Andrew's third appearance on the show this season, and each one does better than the one before. This is the man when it comes to Florida recruiting. I was just telling him that I was late in setting out an outline for this show. He sent it to me, and he wrote exactly what I want to do, and I almost let him host the show by himself. In fact, I would have, but I don't even have that kind of technical abilities. Andrew, thank you for getting up early, buddy.
Oh, not a problem, man. I've been up. Yeah, we're getting kind of crunch time right here. Right, what 6-7 weeks out? I think the fiance knows that this is grind time.
Sure.
There's no breaks, all gas until we get to December 21st or 23rd, that early signing period. So happy to join the show.
It's our extended tax season. Don't call your accountant. But it's been very interesting, and of course, Andrew is in the heart of it all in Florida. Ohio State's efforts in Florida are well documented. One of the reasons he's been such a primary force on the show recently, though, is Ohio State's really redoubled their efforts down there. They are in the mix for some serious talent. Let's start with the guys who have become household names on this show. Everyone knows Ohio State is in pursuit of elite defensive linemen to close out the class of 2023. Damon Wilson, arguably at the top of that board, along with Keeley. The other defensive end, Mateo Uyungale, all the way out in California, so we won't make Andrew work multiple time zones. But could you give us the latest on Damon Wilson? We know he visited Georgia. And then Keeley, I guess his recruitment's been a little quieter recently.
Yeah, let's start with Damon Wilson. He was at Georgia over the weekend. I haven't spoken to him, but did trade some texts with someone pretty plugged into that recruitment from, I would say, the UGA side. I think Georgia's feeling pretty good coming out of that weekend. Now, does that mean this thing is over? No. This recruitment seems like it's kind of gone back and forth. And, there's still some unknowns out there. And, I'm kind of actually working on right now for national side, just, hey, setting the stage for signing day. And one of the big bullet points is be prepared for some surprises. And I think this year we'll see more surprises than ever. And why? Well, we're in this NIL era. Deals get brokered with no salary cap at the last minute. And I'm not saying that's the case with Damon, but, with all these big fish out there, I mean, it's gone from facilities and playing time and coaches and development to, hey, what's on the table for me. So I think that with any of these, we got to just kind of set the stage with that. I mean, things can change, and Damon's recruitment's kind of gone back and forth. I think Georgia probably has the momentum right now, but there's a chance he could return to Columbus. I think, what is that? The Thanksgiving weekend to the facing the team up north. I think that's a possibility. And then, Miami, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to finagle their way in there to get an official visit. I think they're probably well in third place, but that's also a school you got to monitor. We all just saw what they did with Cormani McLean. So just something to keep an eye on. So bottom line, I like Georgia now, but I wouldn't rule out Ohio State.
Keeley.
This is one that the more we get away from that Alabama official visit he took at the beginning of October, I think it gets more interesting, right? I thought he would visit and then be committed by now. I mean, we're actually, I think, a month to the date, and he's still on the market. So, I think the longer this stretches out, the better the chances are for Ohio State. I also think with Keeley, what is going to happen in Tuscaloosa? And what do I mean by that? Alabama essentially kind of eliminated from the college football playoff contention this past weekend with them falling to LSU in overtime. And think about it like this. I mean, what happens with Saban? He's 71, just turned 71 last week or the week before that. Bryce Young's headed to the NFL. does Saban want another title? Because it feels like that might be a few years away as they break in another quarterback, whether that's Ty Simpson, Jalen Milroe. They got 2 freshmen committed as well. So something to think about, just like big picture, what happens in Tuscaloosa. And I think you're in the national media, you're going to start hearing that come up a little bit more and more. Just talk about Saban's future and what's next. And what does that matter in this recruitment? I think if Saban were to leave, that obviously would help Ohio State's chances with Keeley. And like I've said in the past, I think I've said it in this space. I think if I'm Ohio State, I'm trying to sell Keeley on the fact that he probably fits our defensive system a little bit better. And I also wrote it 2 weeks ago after JTT's monster performance. I think Ohio State needed that. And Ohio State hasn't struggled to get blue chip recruits up to Columbus and sign those guys, but they haven't really had a star defensive lineman or a breakout player. And sometimes when you're trying to pitch to a kid, hey, you're up next, it helps if you have that guy that is dominating on Saturdays on the roster. And they have that in JTT. I mean, look at how the receiver recruiting's gone recently with Zone 6 and Brian Hartline. I think sometimes it helps if kids can see that other guys are doing it. So maybe that helps with Keon Keeley as well.
If we could get the Zone 6 going on the defensive line, they'd have to get Aaron Donald and Micah Parsons back in here, but we'll get close. We'll appreciate that's a great point. Here's a name of a guy who, when I watched his tape, I got very excited, but I was told to chill, and that's Jordan Hall. My understanding is he's also a Georgia lean, but that's the kind of guy you can put in the middle of your defense.
Yeah, and Jordan, his senior season's wrapped up. I mean, he plays for Jacksonville Westside High School. We talked about it, me and him, when he was getting his All-American Bowl jersey. I don't think there's ever been an All-American that's came out of there. And, Duval County, that Jacksonville area is as loaded as ever. And I think it says a lot that he elected to stick it out at his school. When you get around the kid, he's got a very vibrant personality. He's just a bit different in a good way. And I think he checks a lot of boxes in between the ears. I do agree with you. I've liked Georgia since the summer months. He took a trip to Alabama. I think that's made it interesting. Florida's not going to go down without swinging there, but he is scheduled to take an official visit to Ohio State that Thanksgiving weekend. So what is that, 3 weeks from now? I'll just caution with him, like, there's been so many times when, hey, I'm going to take this visit, and then he doesn't show up or anything like that. So Jordan Hall's one where he's got a boots on the ground, then he's there. But Ohio State is involved. He knows what Larry Johnson can do. With that being said, I just think Kirby Smart, the defensive line coach there, Trey Scott, was drawing a blank on his name. At the fact that Georgia had 5 defenders selected in the first round, Jalen Carter. I think a lot of stuff is pushing him towards UGA. So we'll see.
Yeah, very interesting. The 2 guys that I wish we got some kind of advertising rate for every time we mention their names, because for the last 2 or 3 years, Brandon Inniss and Carnell Tate, and then, even Mark Fletcher, guys who verbally committed to Ohio State. But like you said, in the NIL era, everyone's free game to some extent. And there's been much chatter about Miami. I think Brandon Inniss drew some interest last week for some tweets, and then his boy Carnell back to Philly. Do you think Miami actually has a chance to come in there and get these 2 guys at the last second? I imagine if we're talking about last second NIL deals, I'm not sure these 2 would be involved, considering the fact they've been in contact with these guys for so long. I'm not sure why they would save kind of the floor mats offer from their boss at the used car dealership. But what's the latest? And I guess, before the show, I made kind of a flippant comment about Miami's progress, but then, Cormani McClain still joined the forces, and he's as highly rated. I mean, I got to check my things. He's one of the higher rated players in the entire class. So set the scene with some Florida insight, please.
Yeah, I mean, Cormani's number 4, and you're right. Look, down here, just the chatter inside the football circles is that Miami is. I think we're going to have to pair these guys into 2 groups, right? So let's go the American Heritage duo, Brandon Inniss and Mark Fletcher, and then we'll get into Carnell Tate on the back end. So with the American Heritage duo, I mean, the buzz has been that Mario has circled these guys. I mean, Miami during their bye weeks sent coaches to these kids' games. Mario's texting him every day. And then they show up to Hard Rock Stadium on Saturday night for, a meeting of two rebuilding programs. And it's a rivalry game. And, Miami gets boat raced. I mean, 45-3, worst loss in the series between those two rivals since 2007, I believe, or maybe it was 1997. I know it ends in a 7. But I think if you're an Ohio State fan, I'd be sitting back and smiling, right? Miami looked incompetent on offense. It was QB malpractice in my eyes. At 20 snaps into the game, they'd played 3 different arms. They couldn't throw the ball. They couldn't do anything. And I think, if you're an Ohio State fan, that is the perfect scenario for you, right? I mean, you got to think about it. What has Mario's message been? Hey, give us a chance, give us a chance, give us a chance. All right. Those kids show up, and sure, it's a social event. A lot of their friends are there. And then next thing you know, they see what is pretty much a disaster. Right. And it just shows how far FSU and Miami, how those two have flipped. I mean, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, Miami beat FSU 52-10. Now they lose 45-3. So I think Miami's going to keep chipping away. I think that, NIL will certainly be a part of the conversation, but I think Inniss sticks. I think Fletcher is going to stick. There's more talk that Fletcher is more obtainable for Miami than maybe Inniss. But I'll finish here with Miami. Look, the big buzz in terms of the newspaper reporters and even what I hear just talking to different people at Miami is they got to change the culture in the locker room. And I've said it in the past, the X factor with Inniss is he's a guy that hates to lose. And he's going to come in and he's going to be a vocal voice to his teammates. He's going to hold people accountable. So if there was ever a recruit, for Miami to pony up for, I think it would be Inniss. But I still think that 45-3 result could have maybe sunk them a little bit in their efforts to flip him.
Yeah, Carnell Tate.
With him, what was it? The Tennessee-Alabama game. What weekend was that? October 1st or October 8th? I can't remember. One of those ones. I was told he was going to visit. He was going to take the official visit, or he was going to be in Knoxville. And then at the last second, he pulls out. And I think that's certainly notable. I think that says a lot about the Ohio State pledge. I've heard that there's some people inside his inner circle that maybe favor Tennessee a little bit, but he hasn't been back there. So I like Ohio State as well. I think, Tennessee's really the only one that has a chance at flipping Carnell Tate. So I anticipate him sticking. Again, though, anything can happen in this era when we get to the 11th hour. But right now, I like Ohio State for him, and I like Ohio State for the American Heritage duo as well.
When it comes to wide receivers, it's to the point now with Ohio State where if you don't take the offer, I'm almost suspect of you. I'm serious about that just because I looked at an article about the NFL. The two leaders for Offensive Rookie of the Year are Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. They lost their best receiver this year and somehow have the best receiver in the country again for the third straight year, and it's a different guy. So if you can't have faith in Brian Hartline as a recruiter, you can't have faith. So we will stick with that. We're going to take a quick break here at the 13:30 mark and pay some podcast bills and come back with Andrew. And we are back. All right. Those aren't the only guys in Florida headed to Columbus next year. We've got Bryson Rogers. We've got Cedric Hawkins. Give us the latest on that duo. Their season either winds up or extends in the playoffs, etc.
So Bryson's season is done. His team went 4-6, and Florida has FHSAA. They've restructured kind of their divisions. I mean, I'm a guy that goes to more high school games than I would say, most people. Yeah, and I have no idea, who's in what. But Bryson's team didn't make it. They finished 4-6. And
are you talking about the Florida PowerPoint situation, how they choose playoff teams?
Yeah,
I'm telling you, they do that in every state, and they make it so confusing so that you can't complain.
Yeah. Well, my new thing is, I think the only thing that matters if you're scouting seniors is the first 6 weeks of the season, and then it's just all right, we'll see you at the All-Star games.
Right on.
It's lost so much lust. But with Bryson, last year he played with Iowa State signee Rocco Beck, Anthony Beck's kid. And this year he was kind of a one-man show. Finished, I believe he only played in 8 of 10 games. I tried to look this up last night. 21 catches for 270 yards, 5 touchdowns. He also played some defense, had an interception and a pass breakup. I can't recall if he's in an all-star game. He might be a late ad maybe for Under Armour if someone were to drop out because he's in the state. Maybe he'll potentially play in a local one, but we've got a good sample size of him. Saw him at the OT7 event out there in Las Vegas. And I think the thing with him is, man, if he's your number 4 wide receiver, you got to feel really, really good about that group. So, not the season he wanted, but he still produced. And I think it says a lot that he also played on the defensive side of the ball. Me personally, I love that stuff. When you take and try to build out your roster, you want guys that can play special teams and add special teams value. Bryson Rodgers, not being afraid to go flip over and have to tackle people. That's important. And look, yeah, maybe you won't notice him on punt or kick coverage, but man, all it takes is for him to make one play. And that mindset is so important. With Cedric Hawkins, I think his team's definitely going to win a state title. He's in like the 2 Metro, which to me is like the worst classification I've ever seen. They're a 2 seed. I think they should go all the way to states. He's also playing both ways. I actually saw him a few weeks ago when they're at St. Thomas Aquinas. 24 catches for 386 yards, 3 touchdowns. On defense, 35 tackles, 2 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. Also blocked 2 field goals. He's going to wrap up his prep career with over 300 career tackles on varsity, which is kind of notable for a guy who's, pretty lean. It's not like he's like some big Mike linebacker, crashing the A and B gap all the time. I like him a lot, Cedric Hawkins. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? Is he a nickel? I don't know. He's got some position what's the word I'm looking for? Well, he's flex. Yeah, he can do a variety of different things. And I think with what Ohio State wants to do on the back end, he fits that perfectly. And the biggest thing for Cedric is going to be getting in that weight room, adding some body armor, and just filling out.
He's a tough kid, though. Like you said, you don't get 300 tackles in high school without having a nose for the football and the want to. There are kids from Florida who come up here who were just – Kai Stokes is one of these guys who I think is the same way, just needed to add some muscle to his frame. But, man, he's a missile back there. And these Florida – right. About the Florida kids. You have some good stuff on Georgia guys, but I want to talk about there's also the guys in the 2024 class that are down there that are so highly coveted. The number 1 guy obviously being Jeremiah Smith. You've long had a crystal in there for this dude. He's a wide receiver. I think you could make the argument that from a physical profile perspective, he's the number 1 receiver in the country. I would say that. That's my opinion. When you can tell when Ohio State has really zeroed in on somebody. And this guy, I bet you Brian Hartline has spent more man hours on Jeremiah Smith than anybody. And he canceled, to further endear himself to us, he canceled a trip to that team up north. I think a lot of people think it's almost a foregone conclusion that he'll be a Buckeye. Has he lived up to the hype? I know this is a kid with Megatron-like comparisons. And yet every time we check in, you seem to be impressed. What are we talking about here?
Well, we're in the midst of an update in the class of 2024. I think that's going to be next week, and we're actually expanding our 5 stars and how we kind of do it a little bit. And when we all sat down on a meeting and started going through, hey, who's a 5-star? I mean, Jeremiah Smith was the easiest right. ones of me. I just saw him play this past Thursday. The other team was overwhelmed, but they just throw it up. Jeremiah Smith comes down with it. He's a complete prospect, in 9 games, 38 receptions, 720 yards, 13 touchdowns. We love the bloodlines, and everyone kind of rolls their eyes when I start talking about it. But man, it becomes so important just, seeing that someone else in your family has done it. And Jeremiah Smith, his cousin, Geno Smith, starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, having a heck of a season. He's got them, 6-3 right now.
Yeah. He's in MVP contention, believe it or not.
Exactly. So Jeremiah checks off so many different boxes. I still love Ohio State in that recruitment. He's going to visit Auburn this weekend. Auburn's having all these kids from South Florida get up there. They don't even have a head coach. Yeah, they don't even have a head coach.
I was going to say, they don't. Who invited them? The fraternities? They don't even have a coach.
Right. And he was at Miami this past weekend, and kind of everything I just said about Brandon Inniss in that situation, I think that applies to Jeremiah Smith. I think Ohio State leads, and I think the biggest challenger has been Miami and Mario Cristobal, because after every one of these games, Jeremiah Smith is tweeting some type of reaction. When Miami lost to Middle Tennessee, when they lost to Duke, when they lost on Saturday night to Florida State. I think he wants to see some progress there in Coral Gables. It's not happening. So, what's next? Where does this recruitment go? I mean, Chaminade Madonna is going to win a state title. I don't even know what classification they're in, 2S or 2M or whatnot. And then I would anticipate he's going to get out on the road in the spring. I would anticipate him being back at Ohio State. And I think the Buckeyes eventually are going to pick up a commitment from him unless something changes. Maybe Alabama. I think he's a kid that fits the profile of what Clemson wants in terms of an individual. USC is a school he's talked up in the past, and he's also kind of likes Florida State a little bit, and they've got some momentum certainly right now, having made a statement in Miami-Dade County.
I'm not going to have any stress about wide receivers. What they've done so far. And plus, like if Jeremiah Smith was even teetering, there's another legacy who's doing pretty well here at receiver that he may want to take an eye on, whose father knows a little about wide receivers too. You've seen JoJo Trader, obviously his teammate, who's the much ballyhooed and kind of been on the move. How's he had performed this year? And you got a beat on his recruitment. He seems a little more of an aloof character.
Yeah, he's more of what I would describe a true South Florida kid. Same thing. Saw him this past Thursday. They were playing in that game, and with Trader, he knows he's so good that he attempts to do things that most wouldn't attempt, and sometimes that leads to drops. But then every time it seems like whether that's the 7-on-7 setting or a padded football game, he'll just have like a one wow catch where he uses his ball skills. So he's an elite at tracking the football. Sometimes it's like just use two hands, but he'll make some wow grabs. He's got 32 catches, 528 yards, 5 touchdowns this season. I still think, man, he'd make a heck of a defensive back, whether that's a corner or a playmaking safety. I think Miami is one to watch there, but I fully anticipate him to go through that entire recruiting process. And we don't even know what the landscape nationally is going to look like 2 months from now. I mean, everyone is kind of hyped this up, and who's everyone? I'm talking about the coaching insiders as a mild coaching carousel. All it takes is one domino to fall and then things to change. And what do I mean by that? I mean, he could be looking at some schools that we don't even know are options right now. So Ohio State's in it. I think he's going to visit Ohio State multiple times again. Don't feel anywhere near as confident as I do with Jeremiah Smith that he ends up in Columbus.
JoJo Trader just seems to me like an NIL type guy. Like if I was going to save up my money for the last week and make a push on somebody, it's just my vibe on it. I'll tell you what, he's talented as all get out now. I mean, like you said, he's that guy. One of the reasons he's got that leverage, he's got those moves. So we will check on that one. You actually have seen some of the Georgia guys. Obviously, Ohio State got a huge commitment from a guy North Gwinnett and Caden McDonald recently, but you've also seen Jelani Thurman, the tight end, another great Bloodlines player, Kayan Lee as well. What do you think of those guys coming to Ohio State?
Well, I think the Caden McDonald, I mean, that was a pretty big win for Larry Johnson in what essentially I call SEC country. I mean, I think heading in a week before, I'd kind of heard it was like Florida or Clemson for him. And then Ohio State wedged itself in there in the 11th hour. And it came right after JTT's monster performance at Penn State. And I marked Ohio State down as a recruiting winner that weekend. I mean, it was just kind of coincidental timing. I think he's a two-gapper. He's posted some ridiculous numbers. I've always questioned, like, hey, how accurate are these? But
who's the stats guy at the defense there?
58 tackles for loss as a junior, 19 sacks. This year as a senior, 31 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. So he's productive. And I think what makes him a little bit unique is if you haven't seen this and you're an Ohio State fan, go search his huddle and watch the clips of him playing running back. 46 carries, 237 yards. So that's good enough for 5.2 average and 7 touchdowns. There are like FBS running back commits that have worse numbers than that. And he's doing it in a higher classification. And, he's a big body, a guy.
He's 300 plus pounds, by the way. So don't let the running back anecdote there go over your head.
Yeah. And he's probably someone that's going to need some time in that strength room, get the body right. But, he can plug stuff up. He's going to allow those running backs to run free. And we'll see if Johnson can get him some pass rushing moves. But I do think that was a big addition because I know the folks at Florida really wanted him. I mean, Clemson, when they kind of zero in on a guy, it says a lot. I mean,
especially this line.
Yeah, this late in the process, I mean, Caden had to have checked off a ton of different boxes. So I don't think that addition has been discussed enough on a national level. That was a big one for Ohio State.
Couple final questions here. I want you to, even if you've heard anything on Caleb Downs, I'm legally obligated by this podcast as Ohio State is holding out hope. I did hear someone who I trust tell me Ohio State has not given up their pursuit of him at all. Of course, he's the Georgia safety who's such a star. But another name you mentioned was Jalen Hayward. And I'm just guessing that this is an Ironhead generational move here. Is that possible? Is he related to the other Haywards, including Cameron, former Ohio State player who stars for the Steelers?
He is not. So
Shocker.
Jalen Hayward, he's what? We have him in the top 100 for the class of 2024. And I remember last time I came on here, you said, hey, who are some guys Ohio State's going to move on in that 2024 cycle? Jalen Hayward is a guy that has been well-traveled. Steve Wiltfong recently put in a crystal ball prediction for Georgia. I do think Georgia's in a good spot. Jalen has been up there a few different times, but he's someone that is going to take the visits. He's going to go through the recruiting process. And what exactly is he? We list him as an athlete. He plays some corner. I think he's maybe more safety. This is a kid that qualified for states as a sophomore in the 100-meter dash. I got to get my years all lined up.
Legit.
There. Sub 11 in the 100-meter dash. I think 10.68 is his fastest time. And he grew up playing running back because his nickname's AP. And I'm like, how do you get AP from Jalen Hayward? And they're like, oh, he was a running back on the youth circuit. And I think there is, a chance he could be an offensive guy at the next level. And I'll finish here with him. I think Ohio State's going to get a visit, but he comes from the same school that produced Rocket Raheem Sanders, who's one of the leading rushers in the SEC there for the Arkansas Razorbacks. So it's a good program, Rockledge High School, one of my favorite, good setup right there. And, you try to identify, hey, could Ohio State go on a guy like this? And Jalen Hayward is someone that I think would make sense for them to target, obviously. So would not be shocked if he visits, when we get into January, March, and April.
The AP reference, I assume, then for Adrian Peterson, meaning man among boys, because he was that, certainly. All right. Any vibe on Caleb Downs? That's I kind of did with this question. Right? Go ahead.
You said Caleb Downs, right?
Correct.
So what I touched on earlier, I think with the Alabama stuff is kind of the route for Caleb to look around, right? What happens with Saban? I think if Caleb were to open it up, and I know Ohio State's trying to hang in the shadows, I think Georgia's the one to watch. Caleb was just in Athens over the weekend with Justice Haynes, who's another Alabama commit. Kirby would love those guys. Kirby, like Ryan Day, was at that Buford Mill Creek game a few weeks ago. So not saying there's no chance, but if Caleb were to open it up, I think Georgia is automatically the one you got to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that Buford Mill Creek game, Justice Haynes, the Alabama running back commit that Ohio State went after so hard, versus Caleb Downs, you say safety commit, but when you watch those highlights, he's basically their entire team. And He's as impressive a high school player as you're going to see. I mean, he moves differently. I don't know really how to explain it. I guess just from watching a lot of football, you see some guys and you just know. And he's the know of the know. So Ohio State, no matter if this guy calls us on the walk to the podium, you take the call. I mean, he's a special football player. Now, they do like the media. His dad's quotes are very long, if you notice. If you go 3 paragraphs on a quote, you like the media. If there's 3 or 4 quotes in the story and they're each 4 paragraphs, your dad really likes the media. So I give them a slight chance for that reason, but we will stay till the end on that. Once again, people, you cannot get a better update on Florida football recruiting than the guy who just joined us. Andrew is the best. He's probably going to ask when we go off the air for some kind of stipend, given the fact I've had him on here so many times, but that's not going to happen because he's part of the 24/7 Sports Network, and they already have signed the biggest contracts, and we get him for everything. So we will have Andrew back on down the stretch here. We appreciate you stopping by, Andrew. Once again, man, you've done more than enough, and we appreciate it.
Of course, glad I could join, and I'm sure I'll be on at some point before signing day again.
Have a good one, Buck.